Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's Walden Social Change Fellows Research and Applications Forum. This session was originally presented at the 2019 National Faculty Meeting in Tampa, Florida. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. William Schultz. Welcome.
Thanks, Lita, so much. It's my privilege on behalf of Walden's Center for Social Change and our Center for Research Quality to introduce to you our two Social Change Fellows teams and to give you a little bit of context about what they'll be doing. Each of these teams earned through a competitive review process a grant and did work for about a year on the proposed grant process that they were working on. At the end of that year, i.e. this past January, they came to Tampa and presented what you're going to hear today live, that summarizes the results of their project and research. We're real pleased to have two very interesting teams to talk with you today, and we hope that you will be inspired and apply for a Social Change Fellows Research Grant yourself in the future. So, Lita, let's go.
So I want to introduce myself. I'm Nina Spadaro, and in a minute you will hear Paul Engelsberg's voice, but I'm going to kick off our slides about a project, an application actually, not research, that we conducted called Opening Doors from Prejudice to Inclusion. Next slide, please. This project started out by trying to understand the roots of violence and prejudice, and as I did so, I learned a few things that really helped to help us select what we were going to be doing. Part of what our intent was to present 5 different times in our local community of Bellingham, Washington, some presentations that would have characteristics that hopefully would reduce the tendency for violence and exclusion, othering people, that had plagued our community, as probably many communities, and led to violence and exclusion of certain Asian groups over our history. And so, as a counseling psychologist, I did some work on studying what are the roots of violence and how could we present this in such a way that we might have an impact or an influence on reducing prejudice and ultimately violence for other groups in our community as it is today. So when we studied incidents of genocide against out-group members, we found out that violence really doesn't happen suddenly. It's not it's something that has predictable steps. And one of the steps that leads to it is the ability to objectify people as others. And that makes the violence possible. The thing that is an antidote to that is not othering, but on the opposite side, development of close personal relationships where one group actually knows the other group. It reduces the chances of violence. And so what we're really talking about is a phenomenon of really cultivating active bystanding. And because active bystanders, people who are vocal, people who will act, people who will not just stand by and mutely and passively observe othering in its development, can really make a difference. As you might see in our, by the way, noticing the art that we're showing you on each of these slides, we incorporated in our project many different artists and different disciplines. So as just to give you an idea of, keep please looking at the art that you see. Next slide, please. So interventions that we thought we would try to include are interventions which reduced implicit and external prejudice. Implicit prejudice, obviously, is that which is within the mind, within the attitude that you don't even, that people aren't aware of. And that doesn't normally operate because we can intentionally act, except in moments when we are called to act in crisis. And so implicit attitudes are really important, but they can be overcome. When there is intergroup contact, in other words, you get together with people, the other group, the outer group and the inner group, if you want to think of it that way, or groups that might see one another as other, then having frequent contact actually seems to reduce explicit prejudice, the prejudice that we see. But the quality of that contact can reduce implicit prejudice. And so we incorporate in our presentation vicarious intergroup contact through the use of stories and exposure to counter stereotypical exemplars, people who stand up, people who are active bystanders, also through the use of story. And you'll see in our next slide that what we did was we constructed our social change presentation by presenting history and heroes. As a psychologist, I also understand that it's very important to use multi-sensory ways of impacting the brain, because our brains really love novelty. So just talking as we are right now isn't enough. We need to also touch people emotionally and do that. And we did that by using local artists, local folk artists who created from some of the funding that we so generously got from Walden, created some songs for us, which you will hear a little bit of later. We offered free food, which was donated by certain local organizations, and interaction. We created interaction surrounding reducing prejudice so that the presentations were not just lecture or people looking at art or listening to song. They were also given explicit instructions on how to have active listening conversation and specific topics of when you felt othered, what was it like for you? So what you see in this picture, by the way, are some people from the Sikh community, which is a religious group that at one time was basically expelled from Bellingham. And now a few of the members have returned to Bellingham and we're wanting to keep them. And we visited their temple. We did a presentation there and they provided the food, which was amazing. So one of the things that we did in our presentation, besides all that I just mentioned, is we started by talking about the history of exclusion of Asian immigrants in Bellingham, and Paul will regale us with a couple of those stories. We also presented exemplars, stories of unsung heroes, just ordinary people, because those stories impact us the most. People that are just like us, who stand up. They're not particularly warrior-like, as you will see in photos later. And we included the local art and song directly related to prejudice and inclusion. And the active listening, structured mirroring communication was then followed up by small group interactions with some trained group facilitators who throughout this whole project came to all the different presentations and helped out and served food and interacted with people who were different from them. And I think they also were directly impacted by the presentation, as you will see in the next slide. There was actually a parallel process going on because not only were the people in the groups that we were speaking to, the participants in the workshop, impacted by what we said, but and you will see in the top the women with the blue headdress on. We all had to put on scarves to cover our hair, men and women did. In the top right picture, you see the man closest to the camera with the orange scarf on. And then in the bottom picture, you'll see another woman with the white scarf on that's holding a rubber band, because we were using a multi-sensory technique to get people to show, because some of these folks didn't speak English, to show instead of just talk about the stress and distress that they might have felt being other in our community. All of those people I pointed out are actually our group leaders, and they learned a lot from the process. Okay, I think I'm going to turn this next slide over to Paul, who's going to explain more about the stories that were told and an ongoing portion of our project. Paul?
Hello, I'm Paul Engelsberg. I just want to introduce myself. I work at Walden as a faculty member in adult and higher education, but I also brought my my other side to this project as a local historian. I've been doing research on some of the issues, interethnic issues, especially in our county, Whatcom County, where Bellingham is the seat. I just wanted to mention, since people viewing this won't know about the history in Bellingham, that the first slide, Nina mentioned research about genocide. There wasn't any genocide or any killings or a whole lot of violence in the expulsions that happened in our corner of Washington State. It's the far northwest corner near the Canadian border. So it's a border region. There were expulsions with threats of violence, but I just wanted to clarify that if you're Googling and saying, gee, what genocide happened in Washington State, Nina was talking about the research. The presentations that I gave about the history, I just wanted to give some context here. The three events that kind of triggered this project when we decided to apply for this social change grant. First, going back to the earliest history, there was an anti-Chinese movement in the entire Pacific coast, and it was quite extreme in Washington State, where Chinese were just expelled, sometimes violently. There were some people killed in Tacoma, Washington, not in Bellingham, but most of the Chinese were driven out. And in our county of Whatcom County, as a later slide will show, all but one Chinese person were expelled. Only later, some were hired back seasonally, not to live permanently, but to work in the salmon canneries. The second event, the Chinese was in the 1880s. Second, in 1907, there had been a recent influx of immigrants from India, mostly from the Punjab state. So we call them Punjabis, and most of them were followers of the Sikh religion who wore turbans, as Nina was mentioning, and they were expelled en masse with threat of violence. Nobody, as I said, nobody was killed, but there certainly could have been, and as many as 200 or 300 were expelled. We're not exactly sure. This was basically cleared out. No Punjabis returned to live or to work in Bellingham until the late 1980s. And now there's a sizable community. There are a couple Sikh temples in our county. And the third event was better known throughout the West Coast. People of Japanese descent were all, by government decree, signed by the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, interned all people of Japanese descent, whether they were US citizens or not, no matter their politics or anything. They were all put in internment camps, incarcerated. And Bellingham had 30-some people of Japanese descent, and none of them ever returned to Bellingham. So that's the context of our grant, the historical context. And what you see in this photo on the right is Pat Shima. When she was 6 years old, she was waiting to be deported with her parents from Japan, and she actually came back to Bellingham for an event commemorating and dedicating an arch to commemorate these events. That was something that inspired our project. It wasn't part of our project, but this Arch of Healing that we'll show you later, she and her family came to the dedication. And she had stories to tell us about her family, collected stories from some of these people talking about the historical exclusion, but as the part of our project, which is ongoing this year in 2019, we're continuing to collect stories of people in our community about how they have felt excluded or included, both positive and negative stories that we plan on documenting in what we're calling a multimedia ebook, which will have some of the art and music that we're presenting today, as well as some videos and people's stories, both told orally on tape or written. And so that we're continuing to collect that. And I'll just read a few excerpts, very short excerpts, to give you a taste of what we've collected so far. One person said, "There's too much wrong here." Another said, "They hate Indian people." And here, Indian, in this context, was talking about native, indigenous people. Another said, "When we first came, the only place you could find Asian food is in the Asian market, not the regular market." Another person said, "I think Whatcom County is still going through growing pains." And the final quote I want to read is, "Living in the most diverse neighborhood in Bellingham with my neighborhood association, I've seen the kind of attitude that the city has towards neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color, and it makes me mad." So we will be making our multimedia book available to the Walden community through the Center for Social Change later this year. Next slide, please. So in my part of the presentations, and I wanted to mention that we gave 5 presentations. 2 were in Bellingham itself, one at the university where some of the art students that prepared the art that we're showing you study, and the other at the public library where the arch that I mentioned is installed. And then we gave 3 other presentations in smaller cities in the county, trying to really get at different areas of the community. And I tried to focus on both the dark side of some of these events that happen in the community that people aren't very well aware of, perhaps, as well as the more positive side that often doesn't get remembered, that when people stand up to prejudice and they speak out, even if their words didn't really stop the oppression or the prejudice, that they still spoke out. Next slide. And one inspiration that I had was some words by the former governor of our state of Washington, Gary Locke, who I believe was the first Asian American governor in the United States. And he later became the ambassador to China and Secretary of Commerce under Bill Clinton. Anyway, highlighted here in Gary Locke's words, we should build statues of the people like Ezra Meeker, who dared to speak out in defense of the Chinese. We should build monuments to the citizens and the sheriff in Olympia. Olympia is the capital of Washington State, who put their lives on the line when they stood between an angry armed mob and their intended Chinese victims. It is not enough to vilify the bigots. We must never forget to celebrate the heroism of those who stood up to them. And what you see on the top right is Gary Locke, photo of him, and below him is a picture of Ezra Meeker, who was an early settler in Washington Territory before it became a state, and he was one of those who did speak out against the violence against the Chinese. Next slide. And I mentioned that all but one Chinese person were expelled from our county. And I found in my research this story about Ah Fat, who went by the name of Charlie. And when I met with Linda Allen, the songwriter that was part of our project, she was intrigued by the story of Charlie Ah Fat and decided to, as part of the project, write a song about him. And what's interesting is he was able quietly to remain in the county, not right in the heart of Bellingham where the riots were strongest, but out in on a shore community near the smaller city of Blaine. But it seems like the way he managed to remain was that he made some friends in the community. He also he tried to assimilate a bit more by his clothing and his lifestyle. But it seems what was important was the human interactions and connections that he had with people. And we'll play you a bit of the song that Linda Allen wrote about Charlie Ah Fat, and she used as a symbolism in this song that he apparently would fly homemade kites, Chinese-style kites, and this is one thing that the children were fascinated by. So it was kind of a connection through art in a way. So Nina, can you play part of the song for us?
Sure will.
Bachelor buttons and chives marked the spot where the old lighthouse stood near the home of our plot. We knew he was there. He was all right as long as he stayed out of sight. Some of us knew how he'd come across the bay to hide from the mobs chasing Chinese away from Semiamu, where he'd worked many years, a victim of hatred and fear. Then came the day on the beach near his home, where the old man collected bamboo, shell, and bone. He was dragging a hopelessly tangled up trove. Then, like a phoenix, it rose. It was a most magnificent sight. Bamboo and red paper in the sparkling light. It swayed and it swerved to the heavenly heights. Old Charlie's curious kite.
Okay, next slide, please. Linda Allen, by the way, the singer-songwriter, is a real institution in our city of Bellingham and in the state of Washington. She's written over 200 songs, a lot of them about social issues, social justice, and women's history. And she's a real local treasure. And we were very pleased to have her join the project. She agreed to write one song for the project. She got so excited, she ended up writing 2 songs. So we'll play you another later. Here in this slide, I mentioned the riot that expelled 200 or 300 Punjabis. in 1907. And this is one of the few photos that remains showing them. And my guess is that the ones who are not wearing turbans and beards were probably working in the lumber mills where it was quite dangerous, and were trying their best to just kind of fit in, not necessarily assimilate, but to avoid prejudice, because apparently people who wore long beards and turbans got especially harassed by people, including kids. And on the right, you see one of Ramneet Kaur's paintings that became part of our project. And we discovered her actually after our project was underway. She was introduced to us, but she herself is from a Punjabi Sikh family, didn't grow up in Bellingham, but she knew about the riot, and she painted 3 paintings that she agreed that we could use as part of our project. And here you see a Punjabi immigrant looking out the window and seeing a mob coming to attack or kick them out. And I think the juxtaposition of artwork as well as real evidence from history is a powerful way of bringing this history to the present day, to people's awareness and emotions. Next slide, please. So just to give you a taste of some of these heroes that I included, we have some slides here. There was a minister on the left, which is William Wark. He spoke out in his sermons against the violence that happened, and the newspaper printed part of his sermon calling for tolerance. The next slide is Edward Mathis, who was the headmaster or principal of the local normal school, which became the present day state university. And he actually hosted a student from India in his own home. And by his own example, he sort of showed tolerance. And the next slide, Horace Caton was a newspaper editor, African-American newspaper editor in Seattle, who compared the racism happening in Bellingham with the lynchings that were happening in the South, trying to bring to people's awareness that, as he said, something like, you know, what is it with white people that when people of color want to work, they see it as a threat? Because in his eyes, the only thing that these people from India did was come to work. Why is that a threat? And finally, as Nina was saying, we focused on just ordinary people. You don't have to be a minister or the head of a school. And this fourth person, Floyd Chandler, was someone I found through looking at oral histories. And he lived into his late 90s or 100 years old and had a very good memory. He was interviewed in an oral history project when he was in his 90s, and he recalled details about the riot in 1907. And he remembered being asked by his brother-in-law to join the riot, and he talked about why he refused, and he said no and explained why. And it certainly didn't get in the newspapers. We wouldn't know about it. So there are countless people who lead ordinary lives who don't get recorded in history, who probably do say no and do maybe make friends with people, do cross those ethnic lines that others may not. And so wanted to bring people's awareness that everyone can make a difference. Next slide. So I mentioned the Arch of Healing, and here you'll see it. And this was the dedication ceremony. And in the foreground, you'll see a group of children from the local Native American nation, the Lummi Nation, doing a ceremonial dance. And in mentioning the various events that happen in our community, I omitted to say that the first instance, of course, and this happened throughout our country, the first instance of ethnic exclusion and prejudice was with white settlers who pushed out and took land from Native people. So that continues to be an issue that is talked about in our community, the tensions and issues between the local Native tribes and others. So we were very happy to have them participate in the dedication of this Arch of Healing and Reconciliation that especially was erected as a welcoming sign for immigrants. And after all, from the views of the Lummi Nation and indigenous people, everyone else is immigrants, and it's something that we all need to remember. So want to play you a little bit of the second song that Linda Allen wrote, and this was actually performed at the dedication of this Arch of Healing. And the audience joined in the chorus, and some of us joined hands in a circle and did a little simple circle dance, which was very powerful. So in a way, the project really, this part of the project reached hundreds of people and was very important in this larger event of the Arch of Healing and dedication. And if you want to hear more about this Arch of Healing and Reconciliation, you can Google it and find out more about it. So can we hear a little bit of Linda's song, please, Nina?
Sure.
In our history, we'd rather ignore the shattering of glass, the knock on the door. But to know who we are, we must know where we've been. We and our children say never again. Never again, we say never again. We will all stand together, saying never again. Never again, we say never again. We will all stand together, saying never again. The first refugees who were forced from their homes were the Lummies to weep for their ancestors' bones. They had fished in these waters for 12,000 years, but white settlers said there's no room for them here. Then came the Chinese with dreams of their own, fleeing the chaos of a faraway home. They did backbreaking labor till driven from here by boycotts and lies and a frenzy of fear. Never again, we say never again. We will all stand together, saying never again. Never again, we say never again. We will all stand together, saying never.
Thank you. Next slide. So we want to leave you with a question to think about. We all can, as I mentioned, we all can do something. We can all speak out. We can be, we can lead movements. We can be activists, but we can also be quiet, even as bystanders, and in all our daily interactions at work, at schools, in the community, and we can make friends with people. We can reach out. But we want you to think about what you can do. So if you want to think about that, you can put it on pause and think about, how can I be an active bystander? How can I make a difference? Next.
And at this point, we're going to turn things over to the next segment of our forum. We have Susan Vidernelli here and Carolyn Roney, and they're going to discuss disclosure and stigma in online environments, perceptions of students with disabilities. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to introduce myself, and I think Carolyn can introduce herself. This is Susanna Berdinelli, and I'm a core faculty in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and I've been at Walden for 9 years now. So, Carolyn?
Hi, I'm Carolyn Roney, and I'm Senior Director of Disability Services at Walden, and have been in that role for 14 years.
Thank you. Next slide. Well, our topic was on disclosure and stigma in online environment, and we wanted to know how students with disabilities perceive this learning format, and we also target staff members who work in disability offices in higher education. Studies conducted in online students with disabilities who had disclosed their disability status demonstrate that disclosure is not the preferred option. Stigma and discrimination become powerful reasons for not revealing disability status. That's why research focuses on the experiences of students with disabilities in face-to-face environments. There was scant attention to how the topic of disclosing disability and experiences stigma unfolds for students in online environments. So that was the basis for developing this study. What we know in our background information is that persons with disabilities enroll and complete post-secondary education at lower rates than individuals without disabilities. Students with disabilities difficulties are associated with expenses, maybe medical expenses associated with the disability, stigma, and potential discriminatory reactions, lack of appropriate accommodations, and support at school. It was also found that more current research has demonstrated or has been showing that for some students with disabilities, they may tend to do better in the online environment as they found it more adaptable to their disability and a better fit for their needs and learning styles. Online environment provides the possibility of deciding when, how, and to whom disability is disclosed. And this is something that we were expanded and investigated in our study. So the next slide, please. So the purpose of the study was to explore the experiences of stigmatization among adult learners with disabilities enrolled in online or blended programs. And we wanted to understand the decision-making process of disability disclosure. Next slide. So we proposed this study as a qualitative research design, mainly from a phenomenological perspective. And we conducted semi-structured open-ended interviews by phone. Participants were students with disabilities in graduate or undergraduate education in different universities from across the United States, and staff working in disability units in higher education. We recruited participants through forums and listservs frequented by online learners or persons with disabilities. Also through professional associations and the participant pool at Walden University. Next slide, please. So participants were 10 staff members who work at disability units in higher education, and 28 students with disabilities enrolled in online or blended undergraduate or graduate programs. As we showed here, we had 24 women, the students, and 4 men. 23 were in graduate school, and 5 were in undergraduate programs. And they came from 15 different universities throughout the United States. And they were showed also or described themselves with a range of disabilities, different type of physical health, learning, sensory conditions, and emotional conditions. We had most of our participants were Caucasian, African American, 1 Latino, and 2 other mixed races. Next slide, please. So results of the study indicated definitely that there were some disability-related, I would call disability-related factors and non-disability-related factors for enrolling online. Among the disability-related factors, participants indicated that definitely they, in many cases, they selected their online programs due to their disability, because they couldn't have enrolled or participated in face-to-face programs. Most of the participants indicated that enrolling in their programs, either as a blended or online program, was a combination of this disability and non-disability reasons of factors. Among those who provided a disability-related reason, the overriding motive was that the online format provided the necessary flexibility to manage their disability and complete their studies. And the most popular non-disability-related reason was the convenience of not relocated in order to pursue education. So the disability-related reasons for enrolling online included managing pain, health, or disability needs, avoiding stigmatization, and not having to be physically present or interact on a daily basis. For example, participants who reported suffering from health or physical conditions expressed that the online environment allocated more time to complete assignments, allowing to sit, rest, or walk when needed. Depending on the symptom severity, some participants reported that committing to a traditional schedule in a brick-and-mortar school was simply impossible. Among those with physical disabilities, absence of a physical setting and limited interactions was mentioned as a positive aspect. For the most part, those who related or expressed that the online program was sometimes the only program they could enroll in were having a physical or health conditions. Okay, so in terms of the stigma, participants reported that not experiences disability-related stigma in online environment, which was across all participants, but all of them reported some type of negative experience in face-to-face environment. They definitely experienced some type of discrimination. They revealed that in the online environment, also related to this, the positive aspects, offer the freedom to be viewed as a student without limitations. So when they were speaking about these brick and mortar experiences, participants describe words such as draining, embarrassing, awkward, self-conscious, and feeling stupid. The participants' perception of their classmates' judgmental views spanned a continuum described by phrases like incompetent and unintelligent, false assumptions, reluctant to understand. So they had a lot of examples that they share in terms of their face-to-face experiences. But, and definitely the online environment or in their online environment, they didn't experience this. Next slide. Well, all the participants but two were enrolled with a disability office. And what we learned is that they have much more control on when, how, and to whom they will disclose the disability. And that is something that they repeated. And in some cases, they didn't need to disclose because they didn't need special accommodations, as they could control their time and manage their time and their schedule. so they don't have to ask for permissions or for not being present. So part of non-disclosing was because they didn't need it, and some other piece was that they didn't have to. While some others, they decided to disclose in their discussions, in their forums, when something came up, but that was something that wasn't in the front of their, thinking when they were studying online. So the disclosure of disability is more selective, and it decreases in online setting. Only they will disclose disability if needed or by choice. Okay, next slide. So, and because they selected this environment to learn, we discussed also these pros and cons. And so most of these pros were related to their disability. They mentioned that they could felt a sense of a greater achievement. They felt a greater sense of achievement and control over the educational process. This feeling increased a sense of academic self-efficacy and promoted academic achievement. Flexibility to study and complete assignments within a stipulated time frame without fear of absence or leaving the classroom due to disability reason was stated as an important factor. They reported missing fewer deadlines, working ahead of due dates, or at times of availability, addressing disability issues according to need. As various disabilities create periods of unavailability, removing the demand of being physically present was expressed as a vast relief. They also mentioned that they felt unequal food were intellect over body appearance. So a related beneficial dimension related to their sort of anonymity that the online environment provided was the feeling of having an equal voice in the educational process. Thus, students experienced the opportunity to allow intellect, skill, and character to become their observed identity rather than their disability. So the online environment created an equal playing field. Students demonstrated strength without giving the impression that special benefits were provided due to their disability. So those are the things that they reported as an benefits of the online environment and a real sense of control and self-direction in their studies. And they did mention that they felt some of that social isolation was mentioned as a con of the online environment. It was mentioned as one of the challenges, including missing real-time conversation with classmates and professors. In most cases, students did not perceive the need to participate in actual face-to-face campus activities. Most of the participants were, decided that their social life was completed in other spaces in their life. They didn't look for that in their education setting. Next slide, please. So as a final discussion or conclusion, we would say that these negative perceptions and messages from faculty and peers are minimized in online environments. Education online appeared to integrate a more positive sense of self for persons with disabilities, and students with disabilities have more control over when and how to disclose in online environment. And we think that higher education programs are likely to attract and maintain enrollment of individuals with disabilities. And I think that concludes this presentation. The next slide, we really want to thank the Walden Center for Social Change and the Center for Research Quality for giving us this opportunity to conduct this research, and to our two great research assistants, both from Walden, and Dr. Taylor Johnson, who just graduated, and Mr. Daniel Culberson, for acting as research assistants in this project. Thank you.